It's just one of those things that it's difficult for me to figure out what I know and what other people know, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know how much of that project is external to me and how much is just internal, if that makes sense. Like, how much of it was on the production briefs.
If you hadn't been on the shoots, we'd have read the briefs.
That's fair. When nextbike first came to Glasgow, I was probably one of the first sign-ups. I loved Boris bikes when they first showed up in London, and it was essentially the same idea, but it was a private company. Not a lot of people that I know also use nextbike in Glasgow, but I want them to because I want nextbike to do well. And so my enthusiasm for the project helped, I think. I used to personally help people that I saw, like, oh, this is how you do it, here's the app. So I already had some experience of explaining to other people how to use the app. So we produced a series of explainers for 4 cities across the UK. And we did them sequentially so that we would have a good framework for doing them efficiently.
So Darren had this really super understanding of how they work, but he had Luke and I as control subjects who don't even know how to go a bike.
Right.
So how many outputs were there though?
4 outputs per city, so there's 16 outputs overall. But there was one main testimonial in Warwick.
The testimonial was good because we got really lucky with Graham. He was as passionate about it as you.
I knew that most of the work would be right at the start, sort of storyboarding it and figuring out really clear angles of seeing everything you need to see, because there's some very close details that need to happen in terms of where the lock goes that a lot of people were getting wrong, especially in Warwick. The way that people were returning bikes was actually damaging the bikes. Warwick University was most challenging because it was the first one, and we hired in actors from the area because each video needed to follow some sort of story so that people just get it. So I would say story is the medium by which we transmit information to people. It's a very human way to absorb information.
So lovely and quaint, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. It's a sort of leafy, eco-friendly brand. So it was lots of shallow depth of field outside surrounded by nature at least at one point for every film.
The scheme's different in different cities, isn't it? So it works in different ways.
Yeah, so the reason why there needed to be 4 separate series of films is because each one is very subtly different. So the overall idea is the same in every city, that where people were getting confused in using the service was in the subtleties. And to be honest, part of the challenge was we'd show up in the city and then we'd have to figure out how to use the system ourselves. So that was quite fun. I quite enjoyed figuring out their system really quickly and then being able to explain that to the masses as concisely as possible.
Because they were informational, they've got to be really clean and easy to understand. My perception of what was quite challenging with it was you could totally plan these shots, but then when it got to capturing them, it became quite challenging because of the shape of bikes, bike stands, and human bodies.
Yes.
You put so much work into the first one, and then by the time you got out that, you'd worked out all the kinks. So then it was just about, the wheels were already in motion then, and it was just momentum. I knew what we were going to use and what we weren't going to use by the time we got to Glasgow, so it was a really low shooting ratio, right? I really like that company, and that's the reason I sort of chased after them as a client. Yeah, went a bike ride a few weeks ago.
On a nextbike?
Mm-hmm.
We both went. You're still not signed up.